Hello and welcome to my channel. So today I wanted to discuss how you would onboard a foundation. So basically, usually foundations are not SDD or low risk. Majority of the time, you would identify them as CDD and EDD. Just to clarify as well, it does vary from company to company, from company and businesses, operating policies and regulations. So this is just to kind of give you an inkling of what to expect when you are KYC in a foundation. Does not mean that it's always going to be the case, but it's just to give you an idea of what you should be looking for. Okay, so just to start off with, Foundation is a non-profit organization usually created following a single primary donation or endowment from an individual or a business whose funds and programs are managed by their own trustees or directors or equivalent, and which can be created by foundations, are largely set up by benefits of a class or person and are governed by a foundation charter or equivalent. And also, a foundation can be established by a lawful purpose that is specified in the foundation charter. However, the precise form and structure of a foundation is independent on the jurisdiction in which the foundation was found. So, one of the key elements to look for is basically to identify and understand the client. So, what you would need to know is you need to prove the existence of the foundation. Okay, you would need to have a record of the full legal name, and if aware, record alias, trade, or previous names. So, any kind of names that is recognized by that individual business. Record legal entity form, stitching, obtain and record registry authorities and numbers if it's applicable, and record registered and operating address. So usually you can find all this on company or commercial registers, and record any other addresses, i.e. trading addresses, domicile or mailing addresses if you know any, and where available records of LEI number on the client's file. So basically for CDD, majority of this is required, but ID and V, so identification is required for CDD and EDD for all this list for identifying and understanding the client. And in verification, the last two not required, possibly, and it's optional for EDD and CDD, which is the operating address, trading address, sorry, and the LEI number. Most of this material you can find through commercial registers, foundation charters, articles of associations, annual reports, primary and secondary sources. Usually it has to be within 6 months, but that varies from client to client, company to company where you work. It could be 1 year, it could be 3 months. A lot of times you can actually just get a client attestation. So if it is over the, let's just say if a company only accepts up to 6 months, you can actually get attestation from that your client to confirm that's still valid, and that usually confirms as primary source. But like I said, it is dependent. Determine the capacity in which the client is acting. So is it a principal or agent? Usually there's questions behind that. So usually it's something along the lines of, does the file contain the capacity of the client in acting as a principal or agent? Where is the entity acting as an agent on behalf of underlying parties? Identifying and record all the full legal names registered and the operating addresses, and conduct due diligence on the UPs as per the entity type. And usually that comes from business emails, client adoption systems, and transaction agreement documents. Understanding the nature of business. So usually you need to record the nature and the purpose of the foundation, identify the NACE or the industry code, and identify where the client whether the client operates in a high risk industry or jurisdiction. Usually, most of this information you can obtain from um, commercial registers, financial charters, memorandums, articles of associations, annual reports, primary and secondary sources. Usually, primary sources one is acceptable most of the time. Secondary sources you might need like two documentations. For CDD and EDD, identification is required and verification of NAC industry code is not always necessary for verification for EDD and CDD. So hopefully that helps. Understanding the nature and the purpose of the relationship. So usually this is, as you can see, identification of CDD and EDD, so medium risk and high risk, is determined by the nature and transaction, the purpose of the relationship, and usually this is done by event-driven reviews, transaction agreements, business or client emails, client adoption system. Source of funds. So basically here for CDD is not required, but for EDD is required. For verification and identification is required for CDD and EDD. Does the file contain information of the business confirming the source of funds? And this is usually normal business activity or activities other than normal business, i.e. a one-off event. If the source of funds are received as a one-off event or activities other than normal business, has a written explanation being documented on the client's file? Does the file contain evidence that the source of funds relates to money laundering or terrorism, finances, risk factors, or adverse reputational information? And if the source of funds providers in the party other than the client or the group, does the file contain who the party providing the funds, a rationale as why party does not establish a direct relationship in its own game and has source of funds or source of wealth been obtained by or performed by the party providing the funds? Usually most of this you can actually get from the commercial register, foundation charter, articles of associations, annual reports. A lot of this information is obtained from most of these documentations. And of course, like I said previously, is you could use primary and secondary sources within the last 6 to 12 months, like it dependent on from business to business. Legal representation. So basically you need to identify and verify for both EDD and CDD the full legal names of those legal representations. So it's like your board of directors, for example. You would need to identify all the legal entities, any kind of corporate trustees. So you would need to get their full name and proof of entity existence. That is required for CDD and EDD. And also where the relationship is high risk, the legal reps are required to be identified and verified using primary sources. So of course you'll need some kind of identification, not for CDD but for EDD definitely. And most of the information you can obtain is from pretty much what I've said previously. The extras would be registers of directors, independent annual reports, which I've mentioned before as well. And yeah, ownership and ultimate beneficial owners. Obtain or create a complete ownership structure, which is not necessary for EDD, CDD. Identify and verify the founding donors that have contributed 25% or more. It is required for CDD and EDD. Identify and verify all ongoing donors that have contributed 25% or more is a EDD requirement, high risk requirement. For all founding and ongoing donors that meet the ownership threshold, obtain and record the legal names, nationality, date of births and genders. That is required for both medium and high risk. And same again for identifying and verifying all IBOs, UBOs up to 25% or more. So for 25% is CDDs, and for EDDs it's usually around 10%. And you verify all the full legal names: first, last, middle name, first name, last name, and middle name, nationality, date of birth, gender of all UBOs, natural persons who directly or indirectly own or control more than 25%. So in EDD case, it would be 10%. Obtain government ID for all holders up to 25, for up to 10%, which is EDD, only for high-risk clients. And obtain, if the foundation has been established for the benefit of legal entity, proof of the entity's existence, industry type, and registered address must be obtained. So that's for both. Does the file contain a class of person that will benefit from the arrangements? From this arrangement have yet to be determined. So that's also that. And that is, most of that you can actually get from certificate of incorporation, memorandums, chartered foundation charter, annual report, primary secondary sources, and so on. Source of wealth. So basically for CDD you don't need to verify, you just need to identify. For EDD you need to verify and identify source of wealth for high risk customers and individuals. So you identify the source of wealth, 25% or more. Does the file contain information of source of wealth, which includes but not limited to business owners, savings and earnings, inheritance, lotteries, and so on? Does the file contain information about activities which contribute to the source of wealth? And does the source of wealth indicate money laundering or any kind of terrorism finance factors? And a lot of this information you can obtain from secondary sources, client websites, Forbes, Bloomberg, also primary and secondary sources. Okay, so this is name listing list screening. So basically every name that you receive in your hierarchy, so basically in your org chart, your ownership chart, also the directors, you'll need to screen them. The foundation, the protectors, basically all the relevant persons or entities that are involved with the foundation, and all IBOs will be need to be screened for CDD and EDD. So yeah. LexisNexis. So basically this will be all adverse news screening. Most of the time you can identify PEPs on there as well, and sanctions. And that is mainly done for EDD, so that would be done on all those various lists. So all the protectors, controllers, all the IBOs and UBOs identified in all the natural persons. Identifying if there's any PEPs by screening. So this is a identification for CDD and EDD. Like I said, this could vary. So you would identify who the PEPs are by screening them, and this can be done through looking at the client's website, any kind of third parties like LexisNexis, WorldCheck, CIRA, depending on what sources, application fraud. So there's so many sources out there, Bridger, Accurity. So you could look through all this to identify who your PEPs are in the business. Usually you need to get this all signed off once you've got all this information collated. And if there's any regulatory requirements, a lot of companies, they look into Dodd-Frank, EMIR, FATCA, MIFID. So these things are always looked into. So these could be additional things that you may need to look into. Hopefully this has helped you to give you an overview of foundations. And thank you for listening.